So induction cooking. Specifically, induction cooking in a camping or overlanding type situation has become more and more popular in recent times and a little bit somewhat controversial. So over the last few months, I've been experimenting with induction cooking in the back of my Land Cruiser. So today we're going to go over some of the results of my experimentation, how it works, what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of induction cooking, and whether or not it's viable on an ongoing basis and is it worth the overall cost. So stay tuned, let's get straight into it. So before we dive straight into some of my results and some of the tests that we're going to conduct today in relation to induction cooking, I thought we'd start about talking about exactly what induction cooking is. So induction cooking is using electric current to directly heat the pots or pans on top of your cooktop through magnetic induction. This is opposed to alternate methods like electric or gas cooking, which uses a thermal conduction of heat transfer. So how does induction cooking vary from something like your traditional gas type burner? So your gas type burners like the one we have here uses an ignited fuel source. For example, we've got a white gas in the canister here, which will then create a flame, which is heat, which will then heat up the base of the pan when placed on top. This is referred to as conductive heating. So we're relying on the physical contact from the pot or the pan to be in contact with that ignited fuel source in order to heat the contents up. So let's do some baseline tests in regards to a few different types of common cooking setups for camping and overlanding and see how they perform when boiling a consistent amount of water. So we'll head back to the garage for that testing. So back in the garage, and here we are with 4 different types of cooking setups that you might typically find when out camping or overlanding. So the first one up is our Coleman 2-burner stove. This is our tried and trusted stove that we've carried around the country with us for many, many years now, and it's still going strong. A simple, robust design with some inbuilt wind deflectors and all your associated gas hosing included inside the kit. This system works very, very well. However, it is a little bit large and cumbersome to carry around in the back of the 4-wheel drive. It's powered just off using regular LPG gas bottles, and I normally carry 2 of the 2 kilo small bottles just for ease of packing when we're putting it into the vehicle. Moving on to the Coleman dual fuel 533 system. This system here is a very compact little portable stove. However, it also works on both white gas and petrol. So it makes it very versatile and very reliable to use out in the bush in the case you run out of LPG. So moving on from that, we have the jet boil, which is the most compact and probably the most well-known and famous cooking setup we have here today in Australia. This system here incorporates all of the componentry used inside the canister, making it nice and small and easy to fit anywhere in your 4-wheel drive. It's also a very efficient and quick system at heating up water inside with the fin design down the bottom here, and we'll get onto that a little bit later on. And lastly, we have our induction cooker. This one here is made by Westinghouse and has a 2000 watt maximum heat setting. It's very compact, only 4 centimeters high, nice and light, and fits in well in the back of the 4-wheel drive. Simply plugging it into any AC power and you're good to go with this unit here. So now that we have all these cooking systems set up side by side here in the garage, we're going to start our first test, which is just going to be bringing 600 ml of water up to the boil. Then we're going to be using this same pot for all of these tests, with the exception of the jet boil, because obviously that has its own designated container there. Now we're only going to use 600 ml of water because any more would struggle to fit in the jet boil, and that will keep our tests consistent over the whole range here. Now I do have a thermometer that's going to be suspended in the water, and it's not going to be touching the bottom of the pan, and that is going to give us an indication about how hot it is, and we're going to stop that test when that water temperature reaches 100 degrees Celsius. So let's get straight into it, starting off with the Coleman dual burner. Starting with the Coleman dual burner stove, we're going to add our 600 ml of room temperature water to allow the thermometer to settle for a minute before starting the test. We can see here that our starting temperature is 18 degrees Celsius as we get underway. Now these Coleman dual burner stoves are generally quite good. Fueled from typical LPG gas, they have a large burner that puts out a significant output, generally greater than some of the compact designs. With the built-in wind deflectors and rugged case, this stove is a good overall all-round unit. Now I had to stop the test at 99 degrees as the heat started to affect the LCD display of the thermometer. Ideally, a remote display unit would work well, but we'll work with what we have here. Now finishing up there, we ended up with a respectable 4 minutes and 50 seconds. Moving on to the Coleman dual fuel 533 portable stove, powered on shell light, we ran the same test again. These stoves are my go-to gas-powered cooking setup. The convenience of not having to carry LPG bottles in the vehicle is a great positive. However, the exposed design and lack of wind deflectors can cause some issues when out in the bush. Wrapping up this test, we return 4 minutes and 46 seconds, which is very similar to the LPG powered stove. Now the jet boil. The jet boil is known and designed specifically to be able to efficiently and very quickly boil water. The thin material used for the canister and the splayed fin design, it's engineered to capture and hold as much heat from the flame and transfer this to the contents of the unit. The largest advantage here is the compact size of the unit, and everything you need to use the unit is stowed within. The downside here is that the unit is primarily designed to boil water only and isn't really a versatile cooking system. Here we can see the jet boiled this water in only 3 minutes and 36 seconds. Lastly, moving on to the induction cooktop. This unit is relatively slimline and lightweight. It's designed to be one of the most efficient and quickest elements here today. However, its largest drawback is its power supply. We're going to go into some of these power requirements a bit later on in the video. Running the induction cooktop at maximum power, we managed to boil this water in only 4 minutes and 29 seconds. There we have it. The jet boil did really well, taking out that test for boiling the water. However, there are significant limitations for that unit. We can see followed in second place was that induction cooker, which was about 20 seconds quicker than the two burners we have over here. So it's not significant, but there is that difference there. So this leads to the question that if induction cookers are so great and there are so many advantages, why are we not seeing them everywhere in camping and overlanding scenes? And following on from that, if there is a drawback, then why are we starting to see the introduction of induction cooktops into so many overlanding and RV type situations? So let's head back out to the bush and find out. So next up, I want to talk about why induction cooking may be the future of overlanding cooking systems. And the first one is the fact that you're directly heating up the pot or pan that you have on that cooktop surface means that you're getting a much more efficient and quicker heat transfer, but also a much safer system, particularly if you have younger children. And the reason it's a little bit safer is the fact that you're only heating up this pot and pan and not everything around the system like you would with an ignited fuel source like a typical gas burner would. This system here is on a medium to high power, so I can touch directly around the pot or pan here on the glass surface. There's no issue there with heat transfer because all the heat is in that pan directly. This means that if children come up and touch the sides of your pan, it's not going to burn their hands like it may do on a gas burner. Now another advantage that comes with this is the fact that if we remove this pot or pan from this system here, turn that unit off, we're going to have a much cooler cooking surface here. So although it's still going to be warm to touch, and that's the heat transfer from this hot pot of water here, it's still able to touch without burning my hand. Now I can demonstrate this by using a tea towel in the back of the vehicle to place over the cooking surface on this induction cooker. I can return the pot back to the cooker, turn this system back on again, system's turning back on, and our water's going to be heating back up again, cooking through a material surface. This here demonstrates that the heat is not being transferred through the glass panel. However, the magnetic current is heating up the magnetic base of this pan here and therefore heating the contents within. Once that water comes to a boil, we can shut the unit down, move it across, and we can see here the tea towel is not going to be burnt. Of course, it's going to be warm from the residual heat, but that's all it's going to be. Now, there's a couple of other big advantages that I've found while using these induction cookers. The first one is the fact that you are only heating the pan and it's only just this area here that's getting warm and not really ultra hot. If you do have a boil over and things do come out of your saucepan or your fry pan and spill onto the surface here, it doesn't burn and etch into the surface here. It's very easy to clean up. Once you're finished, you just simply grab a rag, wipe it down, and it's all going to come off very easily, making sure your camp is nice and clean when you go to leave. Now, the second biggest advantage for me personally was not having to carry LPG bottles to power up those gas stoves. So previously I've carried 2 of these in my vehicle with my family of 4 to power up our Coleman 2-burner stove that we generally carry around on our trips when we're not towing a trailer. Although it works quite well, there is some issues with gas bottles. First of all, I've always found them an awkward size and shape to store in the car. I've never really found a dedicated spot to keep them. And the second thing is trying to fill them up. So first of all, I need to be in compliance with their date. You need to have them filled by an authorized filler, and you generally have to find somewhere in a town that you're visiting to fill them up for you. Good luck trying to find an authorized filler to fill up your gas bottle in a small outback town over a long weekend. Now, before we get onto what I think is the biggest advantage for induction cooktops, I want to talk about some of the myths that come up with these systems. The first one is the fact you can't control the temperature as easily with these, and they don't react as quick as they do with gas burners. And the second one is you can't get that nice simmer heat with the way they operate, and the temperature variance when trying to simmer is not as easy as that of a gas burner. So let's go back to the garage, and I want to talk about this and do a couple of tests to see what we can achieve there. So for this test, we're only going to be using the typical 2-burner Coleman stove here against the induction cooker. Now, firstly, we're going to be testing the reaction time of temperature changes between the two systems. We're going to be getting these pots with boiling water in them up to about 97 degrees to save that thermometer, and then we're going to bring it down to 80 degrees and see how long that takes. So starting with the Coleman stove, we bring that up to that 97 degrees, and then we're going to switch the stove off and allow this system to cool down. Now this takes a whopping 3 minutes and 45 seconds to naturally cool that water down from 97 degrees down to 80. Now moving on to the induction cooker, we're going to get it up to that 97 degrees, switch the induction cooker off and let it cool down to 80 degrees. Now this only takes 1 minute and 4 seconds, so this is significantly quicker than that of the Coleman dual burner stove. So the reason that the Coleman dual burner takes so much longer to cool down is just because of that conductive heating. When you're using a flame from an ignited fuel source like we are in the Coleman stove here, you're heating up not only the burner, but the grill and all the area around the cooktop or the pan you're using. This then retains the heat, so when you go to switch it off, it's going to take a lot longer not only to cool down the pot and the water, but also the surrounds, the metal and the burner as well, which is going to make it harder and take that longer time to cool down that water. With the induction cooktop, because we're only heating the pan and the glass and the element underneath are not being heated, as soon as we turn that off and the power is reduced, we can see that temperature drop significantly quickly. So in terms of reaction to temperature changes, there is no doubt that the induction cooktop is definitely going to take the win there and is significantly or able to significantly change its temperature much quicker. Now the second test we're going to do is see the variance between temperatures when trying to keep it at a lower simmer. So we're going to sit at that 80 degree mark and see if we can keep it there without too much fluctuation in that temperature. Now the Coleman stove is quite basic. We're just going to turn that burner right down to a low setting, and we're going to have that nice even heat consistently throughout the bottom of the pan. And we can see from a test here, the only difficulty I had here was trying to keep it at that 80 degree, even on a very low setting. It just crept up to 83 degrees. However, we're able to maintain that nice warm temperature. Now on the induction cooker, once we get down to the 80 degree mark, I restart the cooktop and I chuck it onto 400 watts of power. This is just going to cycle the system on and off at that 1000 watt power level to try and keep that 80 degree simmer. Now we can see there it does quite a good job there. And I had to adjust it just a couple of times, just as I did with the Coleman stove, just in order to make sure we keep it around the 80 degree mark. So from these tests here, we can see that the induction cooktop is actually more advantageous in regards to its reaction time to the temperature changes, and there's little or no difference in the variance of simmer temperatures under that boil. So we saw some interesting results there, and I think it's fair to say that when you learn how to use these induction cooktops properly, they're just as good, if not better, than your typical gas burning stove. Now the other myth that comes up a lot of time when talking about induction cooktops is the cookware that you use on them. There's a lot of people out there saying that you need specific cookware and you have to go out and buy new pots and pans just to use on these systems. Now it's not quite as complicated as that, but there are some requirements to the types of pots and pans that you use on these systems. And it simply is the pot or pan that you're using, or the cookware that you're using, has to be made of a ferrous metal. Now a ferrous metal is one that contains iron and therefore is magnetic. Like I said before, we're using that electric current through magnetic induction to heat up the base of the pan, so it makes common sense there that the fact that the pan must be made of a magnetic material. Now for me, I didn't have to go out and buy new pots and pans because I already use these pots and pans at home on our induction cooktop that we have in our house, and these work just fine on this here. I've also found that this Stanley compact pot and pan set, which is a camping set which unfolds with a whole lot of gear inside, also works on these systems without any issue. So if you are looking at induction cooktops, you will have to ensure that your pots and pans are of a ferrous metal. Very easy to check in store. You can just grab a magnet, stick it to the base of the pan. If it sticks, they're going to work. If not, they're not going to work. When you're buying online, most of the outlets or retailers these days do specify whether or not pots and pans will work specifically with induction cooktops. So just keep an eye on that and consider that if you are looking at these systems. So while filming today, it has come across lunchtime, so we're going to cook up some lunch using the induction cooker. Now, if you've watched any of my trip videos, you'll see that cooking is not something that I include in my videos, and that's because, well, simply, I am no chef. So all we're doing today is just cooking up some sausages, and we're gonna have sausages in some bread. Nice and simple and basic, but what we're gonna do is gonna see how much power this system uses just by cooking up a dozen sausages here. So we'll chuck this system on, get it heating up, and we'll get this cooking process started. Now I've chucked up the fry pan now in quite a high heat. This does go up to 2000 watt, which is what I've stuck it at now. So we'll get it heat up and then we can cool it down once the food is on. You can hear there, it's only been on for a few seconds. We're already starting to get that sizzle in the pan. That's just how quick this metal heats up using that induction cooking. So that is one of the big advantages here of using this type of cooking. Nice and quick, nice and easy. So there you have it. Maybe basic, but it will do me just fine for today's shoot. So I'll be back right after lunch. So a pretty basic lunch, but I have to admit, probably one of the better ones I've had while out filming for a YouTube video. Now, before I get onto what I think is the biggest advantage of induction cooking and some further testing, I just want to talk about what is probably the one and only largest disadvantage with this type of cooking system, and that is simply the power usage. Now, like I mentioned before, a 2000 watt maximum per unit of for those induction cookers is a significant power draw. And if you're using it on a lithium battery and using it for a prolonged period of time, you're still going to draw down even a large battery capacity. Now, although you're probably not going to be using them for a prolonged period of time, particularly on those high 2000 watt ratings, they are still a significant source or draw from your power management system. Now, using it on something like an AGM calcium or gel battery through a high powered inverter is simply not going to work. The batteries aren't rated for that sort of amp draw, and also they're going to significantly damage or shorten the life of those batteries if you use these on a consistent basis. So this sort of brings us into why induction cooking is starting to become more popular in the overlanding market in the more recent times. And that is simply because there are more options, and the affordability of lithium type setups in our vans or our vehicles are becoming a lot more affordable. Now, saying this day and age, it is very easy to get caught up in the marketing and the hype of these expensive and over-the-top lithium battery setups in your vehicles. Having large storage capacities, large inverters, big solar chargers, and over-the-top solar panels can be very expensive and costly, particularly when putting it on a vehicle where space is limited as well. Now, for me, I don't have any of that set up inside my vehicle, and for the last couple of months, I've been using induction cooking without an issue. Most recently, a family trip, 4 of us, on a 4-day trip, I managed to cook all of our meals through the induction cooking without having to use solar once as well. So we'll go over some of the charging and replenishment options in just a moment. But let me show you how it works. Simply using this. Now, those of you that have watched my channel previously, or maybe seen some of my other videos, would know that this is the Bluetti AC200P that I reviewed a few months back. Now, to put it simply, this is the only reason that I've been able to use induction cooking in my setup. Now, I do have a video dedicated to reviewing this unit, conducting some tests and talking about some of its capabilities and functionality. So I'll leave a link up in the top corner here, and also a link in the description below if you are interested in checking that out for yourself. Now, for those who haven't seen that video, this is a 2000 watt hour lithium ion phosphate battery, which also houses a 2000 watt pure sine wave inverter and comes with some other features like a 700 watt MPPT solar input charger as well. Now, just a quick side note as well, I have recently set up with some personalized links and a discount code, which I'll put in the description below. So if you are looking at buying one of these systems or any of the associated solar panels that come along with the Bluetti products, check out the link in the description below and you'll be able to get some discounts there when you buy your own. So returning to our lunch cooker, we started off with a Bluetti system that was powered at 87%. Now, we used a single stove on high heat at about 1400 watt for a total period of about 16 minutes to cook my lunch. In this time, we used a total of 17% battery capacity. Simply put, we used about 1% of battery power per minute of cooking with the single stove on high. Now, using these induction cookers with the Bluetti system is fairly simple. It literally is just as easy as plugging in these AC outlets into the Bluetti, turning the AC powers on, and these systems will power up and you're able to use them. But there are a couple of little things you need to note or take into consideration, particularly if you're going to be using it two side by side like I have been doing. Now, first of all, as mentioned in one of my earlier tests, these systems run on 1,000 watt minimum power intervals or higher. So this means that when you're using 1,000 watt or 12, 14, 16, 1800 or even 2,000 watt, no dramas. This unit will chuck on the inverters and power one up, no problems. If you're going to be using it less than 1,000 watt, which is what you need to simmer or at least cook on a medium heat, it's going to turn on and off the element inside here in order to maintain a temperature. So for example, if you're using 6 or 800 watt, it's going to turn on the system, which is going to be running at 1,000 watt, and then turn it off for a few seconds. And it's going to keep doing this and cycle this through to maintain a lower temperature. So this does become a little bit of an issue when using two side by side. You can imagine when putting these side by side, plugging them into the Bluetti, it almost definitely is going to overload that 2,000 watt pure sine wave inverter included in here. This is also not including the standby power draw when these systems are plugged in but not actively heating. But like I've mentioned, and if you've seen my review video on the Bluetti, you'll know that this thing can run for 2,500 watt on its inverter for a period of 2 minutes. So this means that you can power one of these on 1,000 watt and one on anything less than 1,000 watt side by side. And as it cycles, yes, it will show the overload alarms frequently as it continues to cycle. However, it's not going to shut off. And so far with the meals that I've cooked, I've managed to run this for 15 or 20 minutes on end without any issues. Just make sure you turn off the buzzer alarms on here and everything seems to run just fine. Now, I should mention that if two pots are your common cooking setup when camping, then you can also consider a dual burner induction cooktop. Westinghouse make a dual burner model with almost identical features to my single setup. However, there are two reasons I chose individual units. Firstly, the individual units are rated at 2,000 watt each, meaning if required, you're able to get some serious heat from one of these cooktops at a time. As we can see from the dual model, the total power is 2,400 watt. However, this is split between 1,000 watt on one burner and 1,400 watt on the other, slightly limiting the maximum heat capabilities. The second reason I chose the single burner model is because I often use a single pot setup when cooking. Now, we all know that space is a premium when camping, and having the ability to only pull out one of these cooktops from my custom storage unit frees up space on my bench when preparing meals. It will just depend on what you require for your setup. So having this unit here has really enabled me to use induction cooking and power these units while on the road. However, this still hasn't provided the issue of replenishing that power on a daily basis in between camps. So, like I mentioned before on my recent trip, I've managed to use these two inverters for a period of 4 days to cook all my meals for my family of 4 without having to use solar. Not because the solar didn't work or it wasn't appropriate, but just because of the nature of our trip, and we're moving from location to location each day, and we just weren't in a place to set up solar through the peak or the optimized sunlight hours. So for this, what I have been doing is using a newly mounted 1,000 watt inverter that's in the vehicle to charge using the AC wall charger for the Bluetti system while we're driving along. This has seemed to work really well so far. Granted, the vehicle has to be running while we're doing this, but like I mentioned, we've been moving from camp to camp during the day anyway and hitting some four-wheel drive tracks on the way. This means we're spending a few hours in the car each day, and having that inverter running in the car, powering through the power brick or the AC power adapter for the Bluetti system, has enabled me to put up to 500 watts of power back into this unit per hour while on the road. So for me, having that 1,000 watt inverter in the back of the drawer system and powering this up at 500 watt means I have a fully charged battery between 3 and 4 hours whilst on the road. Now, solar is a great option as well. Just while we're filming today's video, I have the 3 200 watt Bluetti solar panels set up on the other side of the vehicle, and they have been charging up this unit during some of our tests, except for the lunch cook-up. We're able to put in up to 540 watts of power back into this battery per hour, which means if you're in an environment like we are today where you've got perfect weather, this battery is going to be charged up before you even get to lunch. So this brings us to here, where I'm going to talk about what I believe is one of the greatest advantages to induction cooking that I've discovered in the last few months, and that is the resilience to wind. Because we're not using conductive heating, we're relying on that physical contact of an ignited fuel source up to the bottom of the pan like we do on these gas burners here, that has the susceptibility to be blown away by a breeze when you're out in the outdoors. The induction heat inducted directly onto the pan itself means that the contents is going to be heated efficiently, even with a breeze blowing in. So what I want to do now is just do another test, just like we did in the garage, but one out here when we're on location outdoors in a more realistic scenario, to see what sort of changes in times we have to boil 600 ml of water. So we have the same pot, the same setup, the same thermometer. We're going to conduct the same test to see how we go. So we'll start with the Coleman, move on to the dual burner, dual fuel stove here, and then we'll finally move on to the induction cooker. Let's see how we go. Starting with the Coleman dual burner gas stove, we need to note that our starting temperature is a little bit high here at 27 degrees due to a higher ambient temperature when this test was conducted. Further, the stove has been positioned in such a way that it's going to best utilise the wind deflectors to protect the stove from heat loss due to wind. Now, in order to compare this with our previous test, I'll be adding on the time it took to heat the water up from 18 to 27 degrees from our previous test to the total time here. This will give us a more accurate percentage change between the tests in different environments. It took 51 seconds for the Coleman to heat from 18 to 27 degrees, and this is going to be added to the 6 minutes and 40 in this test, totaling 7 minutes and 31 seconds to boil the water, representing a 36% increase in heating time. Moving on to the dual fuel stove, and it took 49 seconds to heat the water from 18 to 27 degrees, and again, this will be added onto our total. This stove struggled badly even with a gentle breeze without any wind deflectors or added protection, pushing the time to boil water out to a huge 9 minutes and 44 seconds, not including our added 49 seconds, for a total of 10 minutes and 32 seconds. This represents an 120% increase. Finally, the induction cooktop. The induction performs well in this test and didn't suffer as a result of wind nearly as much as the gas stoves. It only took a quick 33 seconds to heat from 18 to 27 degrees in our earlier test, and we can add this to our 4 minutes and 8 seconds here. A total of 4 minutes and 41 seconds to heat this water only represents a small 2% change between the tests. Well, there you go. I think the results speak for themselves in terms of the resilience of wind for the induction cooker there. Significant increases for the gas stoves, particularly the dual fuel stove, which as you can see is fairly exposed. But even with the wind deflectors on the dual burner, we still saw that significant percentage increase from the test we did in the garage to the test we did out here, whereas that induction cooker had very little difference at all. So this is one of the biggest advantages and one of the greatest things that I've discovered with the induction cooking. It allows me to cook on the end of my slide out table on my drawer system without having to set up or muck around with any sort of wind deflection device. So guys, this brings us to the last two big questions. First of all, is it worth that initial cost that it's going to take to set up your lithium battery setup along with buy the induction cookers themselves? Now I should mention that the Westinghouse induction cookers that I bought today, I purchased at my local white goods store. I picked them up for about $100 per unit. So $200 got me 2 units. Now if you've done any research into the Blue Eddy power stations, you also know that they are also a very expensive investment, along with those solar panels that charge them up when you're at camp. But to go along with that is the biggest disadvantage, which is how power hungry these units are, and the fact you have to spend that money to set up either a power station like this or a dedicated lithium setup in your van or your vehicle. Now through my testing, the power I used through cooking overnight varied depending on what kind of meal we were cooking for the evening. So for example, I cooked a dual pot meal using 2 induction cookers for the evening meal, and then woke up to use a single cooktop to cook a cooked breakfast in the morning. On that particular occasion, I did run this unit down to 0% at the end of cooking breakfast and managed to charge it up during the day. Now on another night, I used a single cooktop for the evening meal and also a single for a cooked breakfast in the morning, and I only got it down to 46%. So it's going to depend on what kind of food you're cooking, how many induction cooktops you're using at once, and what sort of length of time you're going to be using it for. So is it viable? For me, absolutely. I love the simplicity, the fact that it's easier to clean, the fact that it's efficient and quick in heating whatever you want it up. But most of all, I don't have to carry around LPG bottles anymore. I don't have to muck around with wind deflectors on the back of my slide out kitchen. But the biggest thing for me is that I managed to get it to work with a portable power station that can be powered using an inverter inside the car while I'm traveling around. This just works perfectly for the sort of touring and camping that my family and I do when we're out on the road. The fact that the system is portable as well means that if I want to walk 100 meters into the bush and have dinner over there, I can take this system and the cookers with me and do that. But more realistically, if you're in a campsite with bollards and you can't get past a certain barrier with your vehicle, you can take this system alongside your tents and still cook in that main camping area. If your lithium battery setup is confined to a van or confined to your vehicle, well then you're going to be cooking alongside the vehicle rather than with the main camp setup. So just something else to keep in mind as well. So is it the perfect setup? Absolutely not. There's no such thing as a perfect setup, and if there was, we would all be using it. But we all have different requirements that we look for in our own setup, and for me, a system like this is working very, very well. The only issue I'm going to come across in the future when using this on a long-term or consistent basis is when we're camped up for a few days in a particular area without access to good sunshine like we do have here. It hasn't been something I've come across just yet, but when we do come across it, I'm going to have to find another way to charge this system up, whether that be with the vehicle running or use the backup dual fuel Coleman stove that I always carry in the back of the car anyway for situations just like that. So guys, I hope today's video has been useful, giving you a bit of an insight in relation to what's required when using induction cooking in an overlanding and camping scenario. They really are a great unit. They're very efficient, very effective, and provide a host of benefits. But that one major disadvantage of lithium power source is something that needs to be carefully considered when looking at setting up something for yourself. Now remember, all of the products I used in today's video are going to be in the description below, so if you're looking at buying anything, including the induction cookers or the stoves I've used in today's video, check them out. They'll all be listed down there. Otherwise, guys, thank you very much for watching to the end, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.